No, there it goes. Hi, this is Coffee Compiler Club. We're here to talk about compilers and language runtimes and garbage collection and type systems and anything to do with the language theory, design, and implementation, pretty much concurrency, Minecraft, decompiling jar files, which you were just talking about. You're being recorded. This goes up on YouTube and Twitter, generally within a couple hours to a couple days. If you don't like being recorded, bail out now. I reserve the right to moderate, never had to do it. It's an open mic. Ask what you want. Conversation goes where it goes. I don't have any set agenda. Just a minute ago, we were chatting about trying to do modding on Minecraft and aggressive decompilation. And the fact that in Java, I'm kind of amused, you can reasonably decompile, add your own class names and field names to the decompilation and do something with it, as opposed to the old school hacking of modding C games where you look for a point past the security startup, but you could jump off and do your hack and then jump back into the main game, but it wasn't nearly as flexible or entertaining as the current Java stuff. That's my opening spiel. We can go back to hacking Minecraft or not.
Yeah, it's just, no, my only issue is that people try to learn that before learning Java properly, and it's a horrible environment to learn. Just awful, horrible class names, non-standard coding styles that were written 5 years ago.
I mean, you might learn bad habits, but it's not a wicked learning environment. You can make small tweaks and see what happens. And
you can. It's just
to some extent, that's closer to what I think most developers do on a day-to-day basis. Here is a homework problem where you start with an empty buffer and you write a BizBuzz.
It's more
that's how you get into the matrix.
Yeah. You need to figure out where it bottoms out, so you have to go hack all the hacks and see what it does. I think
it's a good point. Most developers end up initially working with someone else's pile of crap source code.
Yeah, that is fair.
The other thing going on, of course, is I'll go happily rant on coding styles anytime because I think it's a pile of shit. All of them. Fine.
I just want consistency.
Coding styles meaning.
Yeah, anytime anybody tells me that they have the best way to go code and you should code in this style, they're full of it. And I've been down this path so many times. You guys have all listened to me rant on this before. It's all fine. Code
is code. I don't see the.
No, it's not the code. It's the person telling you how to code. It's not the fact that
it's a form
of
expression. It's that's why it's art. That's why it's 50% art.
No. It's something telling you don't code this way, code that way.
There is something to be said for an impedance mismatch. If you have two developers working on the same project and one of them's like, it's all just functions, and the other one's like, no, I want to do hardcore object oriented, there's going to be some impedance problems where your code meets.
Sure enough.
Yeah.
I don't have any problem there, but and maybe those two guys shouldn't be working together, but the general theory of you must use an accessor or you must not, or you must do this, or you must spell camel case, or you must spell whatever. I've only ever seen coding style guidelines break up teams, but I've never seen them make a project work. So
I
personally like the Go. I personally like the Go model, where it's like, oh, you can program any way you want, but as soon as you save, Go FMT is going to come out and just completely reformat your code base.
Yeah, there's a
That's a pile of crap.
That says if I don't like it, I can turn it off. But if I want to have a style, here is a reasonable recommended style, and all tools make it easy to use. I personally wouldn't want FMT like reformatting my code because I do unusual formatting in a lot of places on purpose. I do a lot of rectangular coding, so I do vertical alignment with similar blocks of code all the time, and all those things that say pre-print your white space this way and that way, like screw that up right away. So first thing I do is I'd shut it off, but some other guy might leave it on. It's fine.
My argument is I can adjust to anyone's coding style as long as it, has a pattern to it. And when you're on a team, you want everyone to be using the same style so that it disappears. I mean, that's the only reason to have a style is so you don't see it.
No, I get it. But my
I would argue the right scope is project, not team, though.
My experience here is that the code picks up different flavors according to who wrote it, no matter what happens. And so I
That's true.
honor the flavor of the guy who is the primary
Yeah.
author, unless I'm
It's a
going to
form of
rewrite it from
expression.
scratch, and then I'm the new primary author.
Yeah, but every project you've ever been on, you were the primary author, so.
Didn't always start that way. Came that way in some of the projects, but it wasn't always that way in all of them.
My point
Okay,
is,
fair
there's a
enough. There are a bunch of it
survivor,
was,
there's
though.
a survivor bias to
There
your,
is,
to your
there
point
is.
of view.
Fair enough. All right, something else besides survivor bias.
So I was writing a code golf grader recently.
A code what?
Code golf. You challenge people to accomplish some simple trivial function in as few characters as possible. Lowest score wins.
Oh,
like golf.
fewest character. Gotcha. Gotcha. Oh, ugly.
Oh yes, the winning answers are always terrible.
Yes.
But to grade it, you have to eval the code or compile the code in
You have to run
some
it.
way.
Yeah, right.
And it got me interested in the way Python does its eval, which takes in a global's dict and a local's dict to act as the scope of the code.
Oh, I see.
And it was starting to make me think about like, oh, if I want to do something like for loops in the library, I may want you to write some initializer block and some incrementer block and some body block that all share scope. And what are reasonable ways in a language to say, I want to call this function, but I want to hand you a scope that's like, here's a bunch of variables that already exist in there, and get handed back a scope at the end that's whatever you left it as.
Yeah, I've been fighting with that with AA and for loops that have no syntactic sugar.
So I was wondering what
the-
people thought about environment passing and how to express that. in a
Yeah, the
language.
index variable is not in the function body or the function predicate test. So you have to declare it outside, and then it becomes like less, C went through this transition where the original C for loops, the index variable did not get a new scope. And so you carried one forward in and out, and you ended up reusing it accidentally or on purpose. And eventually they said, everyone just wants it in the scope of for loops. So they added a scope to for loops. And that's the kind of thing that exactly, yeah, AA is like, I'm wrestling with today. Do I want to add a scope here? Maybe, don't really.
Right, but my question is, do you really want to add a special way to call functions where you pass in an initial scope and get passed back out a complete scope? Or
well, that's just another way of saying I'm passing in a magic black box of extra stuff, an environment, and then you can hack the environment, and I got it when I came back out. But the guy running gets boxed in that he can't see anything except what's in the environment he's passed in.
right, but if you had a function that thought it was going to be on the stack, and then you're like, no, your stack frame is not a stack frame, but it's this struct on the heap.
Right. You've been silently moved off to a thunk because you've actually become a closure or a generator or whatever, and you can't tell because you have no clue whether your stack is a stack or your stack is whatever. Instead, you're handed an environment, which is what I'm doing under the hood in the language def for AA. You get handed your environment, which maybe it's a stack and maybe it's a heap, and you can't tell, but I haven't made it user visible. That's an interesting.
Right, and I can't decide whether that's a brilliant idea to allow you to put in the library things that otherwise would have to be
Or
part of the
suck them, yeah,
language,
right.
or whether it's a horrifying idea because you're going to pin down this internal piece of implementation you can never change.
Mm-hmm. And so many people will abuse it, and then you can't ever change it.
Well, and some languages are kind of defined within the language, which is, the scheme model, I guess, the Lisp model. But, so code that you write then affects all future code that the runtime or the compiler or the interpreter or whatever happens to stumble across. So that's one of Python's issues, right? Is because that's one of the reasons why it can't be JITted. Technical can't. That's one of the reasons why the JIT for Python will never be used by more than 3 people, right? Because all the backwards compatibility relies on, Python being one sequence of operations, right?
Yeah, everyone has access to the entire stack.
Not just that, it's the order that the code executes that matters, right? It has to execute on a single thread in a specific order, or nothing works. Otherwise, people would use whatever it's called.
That's the same for C. It's PyPy is the sort of obvious JIT version, and then you're correct that it is not taken off and become loved by the community.
But C doesn't have a global interpreter lock.
Yeah, but see, the global interpreter lock is in a single threaded program would be useless. So it exists to cause you to single thread against something else, which is parallel, which is usually call out to native C code. And you're trying to block against that. And I don't know, now you're getting the limit of my Python depth here. I don't know.
Right, but there's a big difference, say, between Java and Ruby, where in Java you say class, my class, blah, blah, blah. And it is a fact, right? It's a fact at the beginning of time for some definition of time, right? From the runtime's point of view, that class never changes. It either doesn't exist or it exists and it never changes. In Ruby, it's like, hey, I'm walking along, I'm doing the sequence of instructions, and now I'm going to define a new method on a new class. It's like I'm gonna spill out the runtime in front of the runtime. I'm changing the facts.
Monkey patching.
Facts are changing the facts on the fly, and it's a fundamentally different concept.
This is Ruby, because the JVM lets
Ruby,
you,
Python, Lisp, Perl, Scheme, like, yeah.
Right. So the JVM lets you apparently define new methods. It looks like they're on the fly. They're actually baked into the code with just very little overhead in terms of syntactic sugar overhead, all the anonymous interclasses. But they're all pre-baked in that sense that a pre-pass over discovers the limit of them. And you're saying here, there are new things added on a regular basis that are not discoverable at compile time.
Actually, it's completely different than that, Cliff, in that it's not that it could be added. It's that it only can exist if it's added by the code running in the runtime.
Well, but in fact,
every class in Ruby is defined by executing the definition of the class, right?
Python, at least.
Python
there
as well.
is a similar element of dynamicity in Java. For example, lazy loading of classes, lazy initialization of classes, lazy linkage. And like when you're compiling this stuff, well, you need to take care of it because you cannot simply assume, well, that's all available straight away.
Right, it's just class name.
But they're definitions, they're facts, right? There's a difference between a class existing because it's a fact and a class existing because the code immediately before it said, I want to create a class and make it blue and have it tall and have
Arthur's just saying that.
Right, in Python, the global space is temporally ordered. In C++, it's not. You could compile the classes in whatever order you want, as long as you got them all before the compile finished.
New classes are made up on the spot and injected into the JVM. This is a known
thing. But they're
thing.
injected as definitions, as facts, as complete structures.
As complete structures, yes.
Well, let's say we have a reference to a class, but if the interpreter didn't touch a reference to this class is not loaded. We don't know what this class is. So I understand that this dynamicity can go like far beyond what Java does, but this element exists in Java as well.
No, because in Java, you discover facts. In a language like Ruby, you stumble over steps of code that paint the facts on the fly.
They're saying that
it is fundamentally different.
Yeah, I'm with Arthur that it sounds like it's just a measure of degree as opposed to fundamentally different.
I have no doubt that two developers who are brilliant at what they do, one from Java and one from Ruby, could each go to the other and artificially create something that kind of smells like the disaster that they came from.
That's not fair either.
I mean, clearly it's possible. Java's written in C, like C++.
And right, and I've certainly been in situations where running code would dynamically add new code as soon as you did something in particular, and you got new code added. That there's a number of situations where people have servers that load code because of a URL showed up, or because the libraries just has a forename that is lazy and it came in. They're always more difficult and more thought put in, so they're not common. Whereas in Python, and I don't know enough about Ruby, I know that you get the class on first touch by executing code that says make this class, and then the class kind of gets defined as you go as well. Whereas in Java, you do get a lump effect. When the class shows up, it shows up all at once, complete with its methods and its fields.
Well, once you load it, but then
Once you load it, yeah.
For example, for static fields, before the class is initialized, well, you don't know, and it can be initialized at like it's a runtime thing, depending on when the first bytecode touches this class, which triggers the initialization.
No, I think at the time the class goes from what the hell is linked or loaded to linked or whatever. There's a step in there. You know the set of fields that go in an instance, but you haven't run any of the class inits yet.
Yep. Yeah, and it will be initialized once you either try to access a static field or tries to instantiate like the list of bytecodes, which would trigger that.
Right, and then the CLinit runs, and then there's horrific things happen after that Cameron would be heavily used by.
And then when you're compiling this code and you have uninitialized class, for example, well, you cannot do much. Like it is limiting in a way. But other languages, they take it to extremes.
Well, what I'd say is it's a difference between facts and painting, right? Like facts are like, once it's established, like till the end of time, it's true, right? And painting is like, yeah, I painted it one way a second ago. I'm going to repaint it a different way. I'm going to change the color in my room.
The barrier to change was really low, is what I'm hearing you say. So people did it all the time.
Also,
it's also a different mindset, right? It is truly a different mindset. And that's why it's so hard for Python to shift out of that single-threaded mentality, because the environment that you're running within was painted in a sequence. That's all.
That I can buy. There's a mindset of easy change. And there's a comment in here in the chat about patching Java lang string. Java in particular says no to Java lang string for security reasons. You could say no to that in Python as well for the same kind of reason, right? I mean, I don't know that Python has a version of string which is finalizable, but as far as I know, you can agree to tell Python, the core runtime, that this thing is now sealed somehow and you can't fiddle with it anymore. No one can fiddle.
But I definitely wasn't trying to say one's better and one's worse. It was nothing like that. I was trying to kind of illustrate that there's two different, obviously there are brilliant people involved in each of these, each of these examples, but there's two different ways that they look at the structure of the universe. One is God says it exists, and it exists, right? And that's the Java way, that's the C way, et cetera. The other is, yeah, I'm kind of God and I'm in the universe, and I think I'll put a planet here, and maybe I'll put no, I didn't want the star there. I'm going to move it over there, and I'm going to change the size of the planet. And it's a much different mentality to the
types go the same way. Statics and dynamics types go absolutely the same way, and these represents the both kind of philosophies about type.
Yeah,
I guess the fundamental difference here is that in Java, these transitions which happen in runtime, they are kind of monotonic. You never reverse back. Like you transition from unknown to known, and then you freeze at this state. In languages, in more dynamic languages, you can go like back and forth, and you can introduce new state.
So there is a get class for name, but there is no put class for name.
There is some JVMTI stuff which I'm not like.
No, the way that you get rid of a class in Java is you drop all pointers to it. You just agree that you're not going to talk about it no more, and then the GC cleans it up. And the hard part, of course, is that it's really difficult to not actually talk about it anymore. Somebody always got a pointer hanging off to it indirectly, whatever, and so you can't get rid of it. But people who run big loaders, big servers that continuously load new code, fight this fight all the time. How do I make sure that there's no one talking to it? I always get a dangling pointer. Hey, I want to change the old class to the new class. We got to find all instances of the old class and somehow mutate them to the new class or whatever you're going to do there, right? Or null them out or delete them. Go find them all. Well, here's your terabyte-sized heap. Go find all the pointers. Yeah, technically can be done. It's not convenient anyway. So there's entire classes of people who spend their lives chasing down cyclic class loader references so they can get their classes to finally unload. Having lived a long time, a lot of it is Zool on the whole GC cycle with the custom different GC. You know, we fought all the time with people who were trying hard to do this kind of stuff. And their expectations and how that thing worked was all, you know, a little kilter from what we were doing. And so
Because their code size would go to infinity if you didn't.
yeah, the code, yes. So some of them just had the hope and the goal of the process would make it to the 5 o'clock and then they could reboot the machine. We met plenty of people in that camp. It's just got to wait till the market trading closes and then we'll like blow the brains out and go again.
You get 1 GC a day, make it a good one.
Yeah, it was the 1 GC a day, folks. And it's the big one at 5 when they reboot the process. But there were plenty of folks who had long running servers that exactly were trying to like unload. Why didn't this thing unload? I wrapped the user's class very, very carefully and all kinds of hooks. So I knew I could get rid of it. And somewhere, somehow, somebody had a pointer to a pointer to a pointer via indirect inner class. I don't know what the hell. And suddenly you had a cyclic link that involved a class loader. And so the class loader.
The most common one is a thread. If you create a thread,
yeah,
and that thread is running your code, it prevents the unload.
Right,
So-
but you get rid of the thread, but there's something else that it then hooked in that action that now made it difficult to go away. There was a common difficult to diagnose one that involved a class loader. Like the class loader could find itself. Why wasn't this link eventually GCable as the whole? And I don't remember what the thing, and launching in another thread commonly got you this situation, but I don't remember any more about it.
I've definitely seen people play games like that in JavaScript where they're like, I have my object and then I have my detonator in front of it, and anything that needs to talk to it talks to the detonator that then proxies to it until someone calls detonate, and then it nulls the one pointer that it knows is the only pointer that ever gets to that
Oh,
state.
Interesting. Okay.
And they
And then
introduced
if
a
you-
new class to be
Right.
the detonator so things could get deleted, and they ended up with a lot of dead detonators, but that was fine because they were small.
And
I was
then the
in a
detonator.
conversation recently on garbage collection, and someone was asking, well, aren't weak references more expensive than regular references to garbage collect?
Yeah.
I was like, no, actually, they're cheaper. It's actually faster to use weak references than regular references, because all a weak reference is a pointer that the VM doesn't follow. So it has less to paint. So it actually cuts off the mark phase.
Yeah. Technically, the act of touching the weak ref and the handling costs something, but you don't walk through it. So I didn't count that in. You're right. That's an interesting game. Assuming actually you're talking to something that would be dead because the weak was the last thing holding on to it.
Right.
But there are a bunch of atomic update games that happened with weak refs that were annoying. You had to deal with too. So that when the GC decided he was going to null it out, the guys who were reading it got the correct answer. They didn't have a race where they made a strong from a weak right as the GCs in the next clock cycle trying to turn the weak to null.
Right.
Does
There's a
Java
lot
distinguish
of-
between types of weak refs where it's like,
There are
you're
four-
allowed to clear this thing out whenever, or
Right,
please
there
clear
are
this out only if there's memory?
4 hierarchies, and there's strong and there's a soft and there's a weak and a phantom, and you can go read up on them, and they're horrifically subtly different, and there is a kind of a hierarchy to them, and like
soft is cool. Phantom only exists because of flaws in the Java design.
yes, I remember phantom being like a waste. And what was soft? What's the difference between soft and weak? I can't remember right now.
So soft is basically the JVM's choice whether or not to mark beyond it. So the JVM gets to reclaim the memory that you point to with a soft if it wants to.
Right. Okay, fine. And weak is it doesn't count it ever. And so if it's the last one, it will kill it.
Correct.
Yeah, right. Okay. And so where this shows up is people running large shared concurrent caches where they want to, because of high memory pressure, nuke things out of the cache.
The design flaw though with a weak is that to process the loss of the weak, when you process it, it's queued into a weak reference queue that you then get to do something based on. So at that point, you can cheat and make it strong again.
Yes.
So and there are pages and pages of comments in the JDK and in the JVM talking about this, like how, oh, we have to do this because they may have made it, it's like
right.
It's,
And there's the other piece of this is that the Azul concurrent collector with its very high full GC cycle rate will be able and willing to cut off weak refs at a much higher frequency than the old collectors. I don't know now about G1 or whatever ZGC is at, but under the old model, we certainly had people who were shocked to discover that they inserted a weak ref into a cache and then they loaded out of the cache and had been nulled already, but they assumed it would not. But the semantics say you can, and if your cycle rate's fast enough, it will. So, we ran it, and it's a big 3-letter company with big project, major thing was having these kind of bugs. And what are you gonna do? You cannot ship, IBM's web, whatever, JBoss, WebSphere, whatever the hell, or you're gonna do something about it. We ended up, I don't know where it's at now, but at the time we ended up doing shit like weak refs had a timer on them that we gave them a certain amount of time before we would whack them out. And the other one is I've ranted about before is soft refs as a garbage collection heuristic for your cache fullness. The GC doesn't know it's dealing with a cache, doesn't know what your likely usage patterns are. It makes a very poor lifetime management heuristic for a cache. And then you can get into unstable performance domains where the GC, you're out of memory, the GC wants to reclaim your servers at high load. So the GC wipes some things your cache now misses. Because it misses, you do the work to re-inject into the cache. Because you do more work, you do a lot more GC effort. Because you do more GC effort, you're low on memory already. The GC wants to wipe more things out of your cache. You get in this vicious downward spiral where you're constantly missing, constantly doing high work, constantly out of memory, and the GC is constantly flushing your cache. So you effectively don't have a cache. And this situation remains as a stable bad state from the prior stable good state to cut the load. Then you apply load gradually and the cache can fill. And then you get back to a high load situation where your cache is hitting all the time. You're not doing any work, but it's an unstable performance profile. Right. And so as soon as a little dibble happens in your load, when you're running that high, you fall off again and you're back to having bad performance indefinitely until you kill the load. So there's a whole nother domain here about doing workflow management where you want to have, standard control theory I got out of engineering. You have a control signal needs to be some certain level of monotonic and well tuned with the load, or else you can drive yourself into bistable fluctuating situations.
Yep. So there's one GC you didn't mention, Cliff. You listed 4 of the reference types. There's at least one more, and in some VM implementations it's split out into multiple. But the native GC. So for example, in Java, the handles for direct buffers, for example, are completely different set of rules for their GC.
All right, hang on. I got real life. Well, you guys talk. I got real life intervening. I got to deal with this. Hello. Yeah.
So even if you have a VM that can warn you when you're about to run out of memory, and call some function and be like, hey, you asked for an alarm when there was only a gig of memory left. How would you even know what number to set that alarm for? Because if I'm like the only guy on my server, yeah, I can set an alarm and clean my thing up. But if as I get more memory pressure and like I'm doing my cleanup and then I set off another alarm, which starts doing its cleanup and it sets off another alarm that's higher.
I don't have a good answer. I've thought about it hundreds of hours.
Or all the alarms go off and everyone starts cleaning up at the same time and you run out of memory instantly because you do a lot more work.
That reminds me of the code which does Stack Overflow reporting in the JVM. Because you're reaching the end of the stack, your code which does reporting of the Stack Overflow, like creating an exception and propagating it, can also hit Stack Overflow. So it's complicated.
All right.
Yeah. In the
I feel like this is an expensive problem because it has led us to these the developer says how much memory they need, and then the ops guy doubles it, and then some platform in the middle doubles it again, and suddenly you've got everything running with 25% utilization because we're terrified.
In the Sun JVM, there was a big chunk of memory that was allocated up front for doing that type of error reporting. I remember for that type of error. I don't know if it's still that way.
Hello.
Hello, somebody said hello.
Yeah, I try to. Speaking of Stack Overflow, I'm thinking of this kind of tricky issues in Java. So let's say that I implement tailing optimization, tail call optimization, but in real life, maybe some applications do invoke recursively and cause like a Stack Overflow. And so does the compiler need to simulate or keep this kind of behaviors and for the end users? Because otherwise, if we use like a tailing call, we won't trigger any like Stack Overflow for this kind of run programs.
You're talking about the difference between tail call optimization, or I didn't catch really the question, because the tail call optimization turns your recursive code into a loop. That's what it does.
So yes, that sounds great, right? But what if original Java program run in interpreter does trigger a Stack Overflow? My question is, do we need to make sure that this thing still happens even after the optimization?
No.
It's difficult. It's very difficult to simulate the run behavior.
Okay, so this has already been happening. So forever and a day, and I got called out on this 20 years ago and pushed back, that the interpreter has a certain size stack frame.
Yeah.
You run 10,000 of them, you ran your stack out and you died. But you ran some count of them enough, then the JIT kicked in. The JIT made a new stack frame. Well, the program was a trivial test for overflow. So it had a trivial frame. The frame was half the size, a quarter the size. You could run 10 times longer, 8 times longer, whatever, before you overflowed. So the guy writing the test said, and you should overflow after 10,000 iterations. Well, after the JIT kicked in, it wouldn't overflow to 100,000 iterations. And it took us a while to come up with a test which was valid, that would test the overflow behavior irrespective of how large your stack frame was, which turned directly into how many frames you would go before you overflowed. If that same guy was faced with tail call elimination, that test wouldn't work because you would never overflow. Once the tail call kicked in, you're not going to overflow.
Oh, but here is the difference between what you are describing is it's the depth at which it would overflow. But if we optimize it into a loop, it's a question of whether it throws an exception or just spins in an infinite loop.
So we took a program whose behavior was, it couldn't run past a certain point. So yeah, okay, this gets into the fundamental philosophy of exceptions. We took a program which was incorrect in that it failed a resource check. Now it no longer fails a resource check. Is this program incorrect or correct?
Yeah, that's exactly my question. That's exactly my question. So I feel that your program was wrong. So I shouldn't, make sure that is still wrong. I can make it faster and correct. But other people think that you need to make sure the JIT behave exactly like an interpreter. So
no. I would say,
but at the same time, the purpose of the JIT is to reduce consumption of resources. And if it can reduce it to 0, well, you will never. But I have an example. We have at least one customer. They have, basically, they have a DSL language. They let their customers to write some kind of rules. And they don't have a way to statically determine infinite recursion. So instead, they just let the rule execute. And if it hits Stack Overflow, they report an error to as the writer of the rule made a mistake in the rule. And they actually came to us asking to speed up propagation of Stack Overflow exception. And for them, turning this recursive program into infinite loop will break their logic. And this is an example of real world application.
Okay,
which
but
does
wait,
this.
if they're Turing complete, they can be in an infinite loop already.
Yeah.
So how they solve the infinite loop problem? Solve the infinite loop problem first by gas or something, and you ran out of gas and you stop, and then that solves your Stack Overflow too.
Well, but I agree. I wouldn't bother to support this case, but I know at least of one place which cares about it. And like, if we do this kind of optimization, they would come to us and say, can you please fix it? Or like, okay, we'll
Give us a flag to turn it off or something.
Yeah.
The compiler shouldn't support a crappy code, period. Shouldn't try to make
Somebody
it
has
run
to pay his
fast.
bills though. You know,
Strong disagree. I think the compiler definitely needs to support kinds of code that you would not bless, but
it's not that support it in that way. It's you're changing the fundamental language spec, if you will, because the language doesn't have a spec on Stack Overflow where it lands. Stack Overflow can be infinitely far away by the spec. You're asking to bring the spec into a count of frames, even if the frames take 0 stack, right? This is a change. This is a fundamental change of the spec.
But it's just an instance of this general scenario where the program relies on something which is not specified. It relies on a particular behavior of a particular implementation of runtime.
Yeah.
And implementers of runtime can change this. Well, and it can break things. And now we're at this like state. Well, are we willing to break real code? Like, how much code will we break by doing the right thing?
You'll break hardly nobody, and you will help a lot of people, and that's why I would do it. Except it's not me paying the bills, so you know, whatever.
Yeah, but it's a general trade-off. Like doing things which might be right from the spec perspective might still break somebody who relies on a particular behavior, and that's the trade-off.
Right, the tweet from Matt's pretty good. It's short and sweet. In the chat there. So people have a bunch of questions here. Code that breaks on a compiler optimization is correct. Okay, so compiler optimizations are always under the as if rule, which says that there was no spec. So there's no breakage on the code because there was no spec. So the code does whatever is valid by the spec, which throws Stack Overflow or runs off the end of a buffer and crashes and burns or launches the missile or whatever. There's no, so you didn't break any spec.
Yeah,
right?
I just didn't know that. That's always been an interesting. So a lot of the work I do is in formally correct software, and it's like, does that, if I try to use that, the fact that it's going to do tail call optimization and say that it's correct when it does tail call optimization because it doesn't do Stack Overflow, then is that correct? What if the spec doesn't say all compilers have to do that?
Yeah,
and
right.
Assume the main mission of turning a tail call optimization is to turn it into a loop. It doesn't mean the code is correct. It just turns into a loop. There still can be.
Yeah. But if you do this, you do the same thing. You rely on non-specified behavior, and it can change in the future, and your code can be broken by some later change in runtime.
Yeah.
Right, but there's two flavors. There is explicitly defined behavior. Someone wrote a spec that says we're going to do it this way. And then there is implicitly defined behavior. There exists a lot of code in the world that assumes that it works in this way. And if you change the way it works, you're going to break the code in the world. And part of the definition of a word is what you find in the dictionary. And part of the definition of the word is how people who know that word think it means things.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's fair enough.
Every community has to decide what are their priorities. There are some languages where the formal spec is very important to that community, and all they care about is, did you follow the spec? But like in my mind, it's security and then consistency and not breaking my code and then performance.
Everyone here will
spec
see
compliance is somewhere lower than that.
Everyone will see what it wants to see. We come from very different.
My war story here is back in the day, I was doing a PostScript clone, which ended up inside of all laser printers, and Apple was the first people to do something with it. So to be, supporting with Apple, we had to reverse engineer their font hash function. So our fonts would hash the same way, land in the hash table the same way, and get hash iterated, ordered in the same order. as part of the, backwards compatibility, bug for bug, backwards compatibility. Was it worth it? I don't know. Was it outside the spec? Oh, hell yes, it was outside the spec.
I mean, Go was really aggressive about that. They actually have as their hash function for each map a random number at the top as part of their hashing so that the order will be non-deterministic, so that you can't accidentally rely on that order because it changes every time you recompile the code.
I think that's entirely fair. The JDK went through a big change when they changed the order of visiting, I'll say classes, subclasses in a class, or fields within a class, or whatever. It's one of these things you get, give me all the subclasses of this, or give me all the reflective things. They changed the order, found all kinds of people dependent upon the order. Then they changed it to unspecified, but it was the first time they had a random order. And I think it ended up being, it was alphabetical. So you got a reliable order every time. But they went through a couple rounds of changing this order because it wasn't specified. And then, or it said, it even said in the spec, it's not ordered, not specified, but too many people depended on it being specified.
Well, yeah, if you give people ordered iteration of maps, they will evolve to depend upon it.
That's a good one. Cameron's got another
Absolutely.
good one.
And talking about this choice of like relying on explicit spec or relying on implementation, we talked about Python example. And I think this is the reason why they cannot have widely adopted more performant implementation, because, well, there was no spec and there was basically a reference implementation, CPython, and a lot of code relies on the quirks of CPython. So it's hard to come up with a performant implementation.
That matches it exactly. Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned CPython because I've been playing around with some of the introspection stuff to do. I wanted to write dynamic scoping into Python with a little like keyword. So I've been using introspection, and a lot of the libraries that use introspection in Python are basically like, they have a big caveat at the bottom. It's like, this is the way CPython does it, and your mileage may vary. And everyone just kind of assumes that they're running on a CPython based interpreter. So
hence PyPy and not the next generation Python JIT.
Yeah, right. But it's still really cool what you could do with introspection, by the way. Pro tips.
Dynamic scoping mean inside Python?
No, it just, I wanted to add it just to play around with it. So I have I wrote a function that will basically, if you put a parameter, there's no macros. So you have to put it as a string variable, but you put the name of the variable as a parameter in it, and it'll just walk up the frame stack and look at the nested frames and find out where the variable was last defined and pull the value from that. So I don't know. I'm teaching a programming languages course this fall, and I wanted to play around with it just to be able to show students.
Do you have to throw an exception and catch it to get the stack to walk?
No, you don't actually. No, at first I thought you had to, but you don't. It's really interesting because at first I wrote a function that did an exception, caught the exception, and then was able to do it from there, but you don't actually. I think that might be new in Python 3, but because there is some code out there that says you have to do that. So
yeah. Wait, if you're crawling your stack, you're able to crawl your stack in some Python version number without throwing an exception and getting a pre-cooked thing. So I'm asking, is it pre-cooked and you're just crawling a static data structure, or are you crawling the live thing?
No, you're calling the live thing.
Okay, the reason I'm asking, of course, is that you build something that recurses down a ways, starts crawling the live thing, but he keeps returning and unwinding the stack as he goes.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I think so in the middle of it. So that's funny because I've also played with set trace, which will trace every function that you execute. And it also traces into the tracing function. So you have to be a little bit careful with it. But yeah, once you've stopped the world and start walking the stack, it will stop. So.
Well, okay, so I'm walking the stack in some Python code that's running. Now the Python code, having decided he's crawled enough of the stack, he returns, exits, goes up to the next layer up, who then begins crawling the stack again. But you race them so the one guy who's returning.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I didn't really think about that. Yeah, I'll have to play around with that example.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. Is
Yeah.
the stack like baked off to the side? You're going to hang on to a pointer to it, but the executing frame that was running it has exited the scope already. What's the
I know that
story?
Cole is going to say something, but I want to say one thing is like there are frames. Like if you hold on to a frame pointer, there's also an issue where if you hold on to a frame pointer, it can get into an infinite loop in the reference counter, and you never like you can cause huge memory leaks according to documentation. According to the documentation.
Got it. Okay.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Cole. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Fire away.
No worries. I just want to be specific here. I don't think we're crawling the C stack. I think we're crawling the Python
Yeah.
stack, which
Well,
is a
that's
data
exactly right.
structure on the heap. So
Yeah.
I
Okay,
think
fine.
it's kind of magical because we're not actually crawling the real C stack. We're crawling a user space stack. So
Right,
you
and
can do
also-
amazing things.
Right. And also what I think is really interesting too is, so the other thing I wrote was a gradual type checker to see if a variable had ever gotten assigned a type and then later gets assigned a different type, which would throw a log an error and basically say, you might want to be careful with this next time. What I really want to be able to do is on every line of code that executes, I don't want to have to check every variable that's live to see if they've changed. I want to see which one was just assigned. So you can trace every bit code operation that executes, but the problem is you can't look at the stack of the interpreter, of the bitcode interpreter, and only on the stack is the value of the variable, or not the value of the variable being assigned, but the name of the variable being assigned. So you can tell that an assignment is happening, but you can't look at that stack and say, oh, the value 5 is about to be put on it because it's on the top of the runtime stack. And then, so it's very interesting what you can get access to and what you can't. It's like, it's so close to being perfect. So, and if, by the way, if anyone wants to play around with that with me, hit me up on the internets.
I'm still going to get annoyed at any developer who's like A and then calls the make A6 function and then uses A as 6.
Well, yeah, but I think, so what's really interesting is like, they do a lot of where I've been seeing errors is not errors, but these things is sort of like when you have a loop or a range-based iterator and you're looping through something through a data structure, through heterogeneous data structure. And so you assign the iterator variable string, then an int, then a blah, blah, blah. And so that's where a lot of that comes in. And it's so false positives, but still pretty cool. I think it's been a lot of fun. I'm actually running it against the unit tests of matplotlib right now, just as an experiment to see. And actually they do pretty well. There's only like 5 or 6 instances where, and they don't have MyPy typings on. So, and by the way, I apologize for now completely hijacking the conversation. I'm sorry, I had no intention.
No problem. It's
No.
totally cool.
All
That's why
good.
we're here. Yeah.
That's right. Somebody else's war stories. It's all good.
I'm just here because Cliff Click, and I love Cliff Click. So.
Well, thank you, but I'm married, so we can go that far and be done.
We should just all get together and blame him that there's no
My fault.
tail calls in the JVM because he
it's
didn't
my fault.
sneak off into the corner and implement them.
That's right,
decades
yeah.
ago.
Yeah. I had it down to like 2 weeks. I could have done it, and then never got the 2-week window. And yeah, fine. Long old bad history, long gone.
I don't think you could do it in 2 weeks now.
Not now, no. Back in the day, and I would have had to have changed the spec. See the actual whatever, not the written formal spec, but the as practice spec, which I already did when I said because I'm jitting, you don't overflow after 1,000 nested calls. You overflow after whatever the JIT says, which is 10,000 or whatever. So if I was going to do tail call elimination, it would be changing the spec again that way, which I think would have flown back in that era because no one cared so much and it was all very exciting and new, and there were a lot of folks asking for it. But not now. No, boy, geez. Fine, done.
But really dumb things would break now where someone's like, right, but we parse the error that comes out and you changed the character number of the error because one of the stack frames disappeared.
Yeah. I just picked up a new guy, Max. Why can't I-
Howdy.
Hey. Somehow I have lost your email. Zoom name
Max, what
mapping.
brings you to discussions of compilers?
What brings me to discussion of compilers? Well, compilers. You know,
We're talking Python and
we're talking about
running
Python.
the
That's my
Python
favorite.
stack and the Python interpreter and editing your Python stack while you're running in the Python interpreter and all kinds of crazy things.
Why would you edit your Python stack while running?
Well, ask Will here.
Because you can.
Exactly. Thank you. I don't know who said that, but that's exactly right. And in fact, you can actually, it's so cool because parts of the Python frame are read only and part of them are read write. So you can actually change the line that you're executing when you are in a systrace call. So if it traces it, so in your function that stops on every line that's executed, you can then reset and tell it to go to a different spot. You can change variables. It's awesome. It's
That
awesome.
just sounds like a bad idea.
Oh, it
Wait,
is. It's
wait a
totally
minute.
fine.
If one stack frame is modifiable, then someone may hack it, change the return target and jump to somewhere else. So it sounds very insecure.
Oh, yeah.
Which brings me back to the first question I started with. If you're trying to write a program to grade somebody else's code golf, how do you stop them from taking over the auto grader?
You put a gas on it and you kill it. The A version of gas is you give it 1 CPU second and then you just kill -9. Kabam! Done.
But I've also wanted to do things like not delete the hard drive.
Well,
That's what virtual
then you
machines
have to
are
run
for,
it in the
right?
sandbox, you know. If you're
I
gonna
guess
do
you
that,
could do that, just put everything in its own virtual machine. And
Is this C
you get
code or is this
once a
Java?
minute?
What kind of code
This
is
is
this?
Python in this particular example.
Can you delete all ability to do IO? You know,
So there
yeah,
was a
virtual
language-
machine.
There was a language I saw recently that offered the ability, the whole thing was you pass in an IO to the main, and then you pass that IO around everywhere.
It's not
And-
Python though.
Well, no, it's not Python. Python is just like, you know, your shit out of luck.
Run it in a Docker instance and blow it down and clone it again.
Exactly. But this language allows you to mock IO, so you can just give it some fake IO thing and then use that for tests or sandboxing or whatever. And I think that sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, I've been there,
Yeah,
done that.
ecstasy uses injection. So there is no IO in the language. There is no network. There's no
Right,
disk.
you're doing it the right
So
way.
it's all completely mockable.
So when to do this in Java, I had to override system.in and out to test the REPL. In Java, I had to go override sys.in, sys.out, which
Java's badly broken in this respect because it just has too many globals inherent to the language design.
yeah.
So the like extreme way to do this is to say the only way anything ever gets into a function is when you pass it into the function.
Yeah.
But that's clearly inconvenient because there's a bunch of things that I want to just be in scope everywhere, like if and for and wow, possibly even and or. So how many scopes do I need for my functions? Do I want to have a global object that gets passed by default unless I specifically filter it?
So
and then
all the functions you just mentioned there are all pure. So those can always be thrown in for free. If, while, for, loop, they're all implementations of them are all pure. They just be thrown in.
Yeah, what if you want to override the behavior of if?
You override the behavior if in your local scope, and everyone outside your scope.
Yeah, always check the locals before you check the globals.
No, I mean, you're not allowed to go change the behavior of if outside of your local scope.
But what if you want to inject different if, is I think what Aaron's talking about.
Yeah, right. No, I'd say no. Now you can't do an injection that replaces, you could, if you coming in from a high level and you say in this body of code, I want to inject if, totally allowed. If I'm here and I want to inject if over here, disallowed. You're not in my scope. I don't manage this code. I can't change how that code behaves.
Have you ever written Ruby?
No, thank God.
Oh yeah, don't do it then. You won't like it.
There are plenty of people around here who do, or at least know enough horror stories about it. No, it's the same thing I've seen in other languages. As soon as you allow somebody here to inject over here, you get some cool behaviors and you get all kinds of weird breakages because this guy demands or hands something crappy to this guy who then chokes and dies. And that's a semantic change that's hard to manage beyond the one step. You could do it because I own this app, I own that app. I'll make this guy inject some feature of that guy for logging or whatever, because I own these two, but I can't scale it up hierarchically anymore.
Well, so in Ruby, it's not just allowed, but encouraged.
Yeah, I'm not saying that. I'm saying if I'm here and I want to inject here and below, fine.
What happened to the good old days of cowboy programming?
Exactly.
So there's a
Trying to rein in
fundamental
the
law, I
cowboys.
think, of software, which is not often respected, which is if it's not composable recursively, it's wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I'm
so
with you on that one.
globals, for example, are wrong by definition. If you have a global, it's incorrect.
Yeah,
So because it's not composable recursively.
yeah.
Right, but that's why I'm saying, what if we think about globals not as like actually being globals, but to say there is some kind of scope object that when I call a function automatically gets passed on. Unless I specifically decide to filter it or give you an empty
Right.
one or whatever.
Right.
And then we
Haskell has
have
the IO monad exactly to let you bound these things. Scala does implicits, which is a way to pass things along sort of by default, a little more syntactically cheaper. Of course, it's built over Java, so it's already toast. But if you
OCaml's
ignore the
doing
Java
modular
piece,
implicits.
sorry,
OCaml's moving toward modular implicits.
are they? Okay.
It's going to be like another
They
10
borrow
years
they
before
borrow
labs.
their design from Scala specifically, and they say that they borrow from implicit Scala.
Now, a question for all you Scala and OCaml folks is, what's the performance implication if I implicitly pass along 27 variables so that my stack frame includes like this huge mountain of things every time?
Implicit resolutions happens during typing. Mm,
No,
That-
the running execution code, how does the code that's using the implicit get the implicit variable? Where do you get passed in? You get passed in as an extra parameter in the JITted code? TDR lost your
can
sound.
become. Do you hear me?
Yeah, comes and goes.
Yeah. Chopping. It's a little chopping.
Okay, try again. You're sounding good now.
Okay. Scala, when the Scala implicit resolutions is during typing. When the resolution ends, it becomes a function parameter. If you pass it,
Right.
you just say it implicitly, and compiler finds what to pass in there, and
Okay.
it becomes a function call. It
Now
becomes
my
a parameter to a function call. Yeah.
Right. Now my question is, what is the cost? What is the cost model? If I have an implicit and I pass one extra parameter to a 3-argument function, for instance, I have a 4-argument function.
Yeah.
And now I pass 200 extra implicit parameters. And now I have a 204 parameter function call.
Right.
That function call is hideously expensive relative to the
Yeah.
4 one. What's the
Yes.
cost model here?
Yeah.
One register, one's push.
Is it
Yeah.
you take all implicits and you put them somewhere that can be reached? You make a data structure somewhere that can be reached from one extra pointer. You only ever pass one extra pointer. I'm not suggesting, I'm asking, how would you do this to avoid the problem of 200 extra parameters just killing you for performance?
One implicit resolution will equal one extra function parameter. It doesn't try to compact them, like you say.
Yeah. I'm proposing that model has a hidden performance cost that will become very obvious as you raise the count of things you're passing implicitly. I implicitly passed IO up to the top. I went down a few layers. I implicitly passed some environment. I implicitly passed. By the time I'm 20 layers deep, I'm passing 20 extra parameters. I ran out of registers. And now I don't have cheap function calls anymore.
One way around that is to pass an implicit environment from map to what do you want to. You pass a map instead
to get
of
the implicit variable. I have to do a map lookup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one way to go.
I'm throwing out what's the cost model.
Yeah,
So
I can
it's
think of 3 ways to do it, and they all have expenses. Too many
Well-
parameters can get expensive. A pointer, so I have to look through a map, gets expensive. Or I could walk up the stack until I find the implicit thing, which is also expensive.
There's a display model where you crawl the display stack, and then there's a bunch of variants. I'm not saying.
I mean, that's JavaScript's prototype chains, right?
Yeah, right. And I'm offering that JavaScript isn't as fast as Java for a reason. All right. Maybe it's the right answer. I don't know.
I think actually no. What are the tricks VA does to make the prototype chains not terrible performance?
Right. There's a lot of engineering involved, I'm sure. I'm with Cameron that the notion of globals being sort of fundamentally broken remains. They allow too much thing. They prevent a scaling in a certain set of ways. There's issues there. I don't know. Yeah, I can see use cases for them still.
But there's lots of use cases for different scopes, you know? Okay, I've got my global variable for my process, and I've got my file system for my computer, and I've got my URLs for my planet. Like,
well, I have a notion of a JDBC driver, which is being reached at by a lot of different processes. Effectively, it has globals in its own self, but it's scoped to a process. And you could argue that the limit of that is the process boundary. Within the JDBC driver, he doesn't care. Maybe it's fine.
right. And if I can recurse that and say, hey, I'm going to call this new thing, but I'm also going to pass in a new globals object that is the empty dictionary or something else, then now I've sort of recovered and now that looks like the process boundary to everything inside it, even though it's not an OS process boundary.
Is this your, Cameron, is this your link to your concept of passing an environment to a thread?
So kind of, this is where, so for example, there's a common style in web development where, you know, for example, you get a request comes in, you validate the user, and you know, there's some security thing that happens, and there's some token that you generate, and that token has to be available, you know, 50 steps down the stack. Someone has to be able to reach up into the ether and grab the token. So it's not a global, it's tied to a logical thread of execution.
Yeah.
And so it's what we call a context token. So you see this.
So you would say replace globals with request contexts because they compose better.
No, it's actually, this one can't replace a global because it's not a global. It's tied to a. So
what is its main purpose?
Largely with, we replace globals largely with injection. But in this case, what's its main purpose? Same concept as implicits. It's just not broken in its design. I mean, I think the Scala approach to implicits is badly broken. So
what's broken about it?
There are ups and downs, of course.
They're very brittle. They're extremely brittle. I mean, so it can't compose because it's compiled into the bytecode itself. So you can't have a merger of two libraries using implicits because they can't. There's nothing dynamic about it. So what you're looking for is static execution time. So, you know, predictable, whether it's 01 or whatever. You're looking for a predictable cost of execution while you still maintain that composability of multiple domains.
All right. So you're claiming it's not composable because, for instance, two libraries couldn't enjoy the same context because it was compiled at different times, or baked in at different times. They cannot.
Exactly. It becomes a compile time issue.
Yeah.
Although, you know, I haven't looked at it in years, Tito, so it could be dramatically improved from what I saw.
No, you're talking about semantics.
I'm still trying to nail down what do you think that prevents them to be composable? I'm still trying to understand exactly.
Well,
because you have to rewrite
Sounds like
all
it's
the
the diamond
functions and
dependency
stack
problem.
between the producer and the consumer.
You have to rewire. That's exactly right. That's what I'm hearing too.
And the main thing is between the producer and the consumer, you have system libraries, and you have, you know, a bunch of other things that you don't want to be rebuilding just for your particular application at this point in time, right? So
well, what I'm hearing is you're passing in the context or the environment, so it's not a global, and that environment contains everything that you want to have that you don't start with. So you always, in your model, of course, everything starts in an empty box, and God hands you everything you're ever going to get. So God had to hand you an IO environment. It had a file open, close, read, write permissions against some section of whatever. I can't, in Scala, take that set of permissions I got and share it freely with another unrelated guy without just copying the parts out that the other guy needs, because the implicits are precompiled without reference to some other state.
Yeah, the main difference would be how context token in Ecstasy extracts. How do you extract information from this token? Like a method, like get me this type, get me this variable. I don't know how exactly the context token would work, because the implicits are just implicits. They are part of compilation, part of type resolution process. And when that process ends, and the parameters which are marked implicits are fixed.
Right. Yeah. So this actually requires a runtime call. You say, give me the value.
Yeah. Well, the token behaves like a map, like a context map, but the implicits happen during the compilation time. That's their resolution.
But think about it from a stack frame point of view. The context token is only available from the point you put it on the stack, on down the stack. So, you know, a stack is like an accordion. You're going in and out, in and out. But if you put it in up here, any of those has access to it. But as soon as you pop past that stack, it's gone.
Yeah, it behaves like something like thread local, maybe something like a thread local. But
It's
for
like
The
stack
analogy I would
persistent-
reach for is HTTP. You have some main body of the
That's the
HTTP
use case
request,
right there.
but there is also this headers object that's like, oh, by the way, there's an extra string to string stitch that is on every call between every two servers ever. What's it got in it? I don't know. That's probably not typed. Like maybe you have this really nice, strong protobuf that typed everything, but then you've also got this dictionary of strings to strings and headers that gets used for things.
So the request for the feature actually came from someone who had been using implicits, and they had that problem where it's like, okay, way back here, I know what the value is and I want to put it in, and way over here, I want to use it. And in between, I have code I don't own.
Just to be sure, the context token can contains different types. You ask it for a. Okay, cool. Yeah.
Whatever type you
there
So how do I
certainly
set up a
overlap.
call? If I want to call a function, but I want to say, as part of this function call, I would like to add an extra context header object to this function call.
We don't have anything like that. It's more that you simply infect your logical thread of execution with an additional addressable piece of data. So you're basically saying anyone that I call, or anyone that they call, or anyone that they call, if they ask for this piece of information, here it is. So it's a scoped global, if you will.
Right, and as a scoped thing, it goes all the way down. Can you cross thread boundaries with it?
So we don't have threads, so that's easy.
You can
But
cross service.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And that's part of the beauty of it, yeah. So, and in fact, if you cross the service boundary, and then where it crosses, it unwinds and goes back past that point. So now it's gone, right? Where it crossed, it keeps it. So it's like the originating thread of execution, as the logical thread of execution is already gone. It's completely gone.
They can survive the guy who started it.
So it's basically a persistent data structure in the closure sense.
And is it strongly typed? Or is it
There certainly overlap with Scala implicits in their core behavior, in their core intent. How do you use it? But I won't exactly want map it one-to-one. There are certainly more suitable use cases for the token, the context token, and more suitable cases about the Scala implicits. The Scala implicits, that was the main problem. The Scala implicits can be used in many ways, and that's in Scala 3. They try to distinguish the many ways you can use the implicits to try to break their functionality into more streamlined, to streamline it a little more for the use cases they observe it.
And you also have thread locals in Java, which of course are hugely useful.
So is this context of value, or can I stick like a network connection in there?
Yeah, just any object.
So
the version I
IOs in there
posted a
just
link
fine.
to is actually an old version. I don't actually have the new.
What I heard was I have a pointer to machine local state that's in like native outside of the normal language. Can I do that? Can I pass to a service a lock? Can I pass to a service a file lock that's local on my local node? Like outside your, in the service run somewhere else. What are you going to get? What are you going to do with it? I'm missing.
We don't. So all we have is a single reference type system. So there's nothing outside of that. So within ecstasy, there's no access to anything that's not an ecstasy reference.
Okay, so how does ecstasy hold on to an open file?
So you would inject the file, or you would inject the file system or whatever, and then you would open it up and
Right, and the
you
file
could have a
system has a
channel.
machine.
When you open, you have a channel, which is a reference. Yeah, everything's a reference.
Okay, so somewhere in the world, we've opened a channel to a file that's on machine local to the current machine. I hand to this service, this file, this channel, which has a,
But the service is still within the same process space. We have a million services in the same process space.
okay, so there's not, the service model does not let me cross a machine boundary.
Correct.
Is that
Or
actually?
even a process boundary.
Yeah, we,
Well,
right,
there's-
I'm headed for a machine
From your
boundary to
code's
process
point of
boundary
view, there is
next.
no such thing as a process. Like it's,
Well, you're gonna run on Linux, you're gonna have a process.
no, but you're not aware of that. You don't know if you're on Linux.
Okay,
Because
so
your
you're
view of the outside world is handed to you. Like,
yeah, I get it.
whatever you think is a network is something that was handed to you as an interface for a network.
Right, so someone
Whatever you think
handed
is
me
a-
an open channel that I can scribble on that's
Right.
backed by a file on some machine. Now,
Right,
is that
you could do that?
is that service able to be handed off, run on another machine in the cloud because I have a parallel billion of them and I need to have, I need to have a billion servers to keep up?
Yeah,
or-
you could do that, but you'd have to proxy so the container on where you're proxying it to would have to inject a file system that's actually not a file system. It implements the file system interface, but it proxies it all back.
Who implements that piece? Is that part of the core ecstasy so that the user doesn't have to have a file system proxy ability knowledge?
So good question. We're not to that point yet. I mean, the file system APIs are defined by us, but we don't, but you could define your own. Like there's no.
Right. No, I'm asking what then happens if I just take your current file system API and it's functioning as expected, and I build this open channel to some file to be scribbled on, and I want to hand it off to a service. So at the current point in time, for instance, you'll never cross a machine boundary when I make it to another service. There is no way to define an ecstasy setup where the service I'm calling is on another machine without me
Correct.
implementing the forwarding. Okay.
Correct.
Okay, fine. So if I implement the forwarding to another machine, I would be handed a proxy, when handed a open channel, I have to decide how am I forwarding. Okay, fine. Does that answer your question, Aaron? I'm
Yeah, I
not
mean,
caught up now.
We try really hard to have no magic, if you know what I mean. Like,
Right.
So,
Well, exactly.
so
I'm
that you
poking
could
at
build
where
that
this
into a
has to-
library, and the library would be magic. But if you looked in the library, it'd be like, oh yeah, they're just numbers I'm passing across a socket. Big whoop-de-doo. Like anyone can do that. That's the goal. You want it to feel like magic, but when you look inside, you want to realize that there's never any magic.
Well, I was asking what was the magic? Who was responsible for implementing the magic to cross a machine boundary? And was it part of the ecstasy core model, or
Nope.
you
It's not defined
arrange
yet.
you arrange a service model such that if I wanted to implement a cross machine service that was accepting strongly typed file system channel objects, presumably I have to deal with that as part of how I hand it over the wire, how I serialized it down, how the other guy unpacked it and then rebuilt that channel.
Yeah, we have not designed RMI.
Okay,
But
that was
it is, but the language is certainly designed to enable it to be designed strongly and safely.
okay. I would think, given your stated goals, you would want to have an RMI figured out pretty soon. I assume that your
What is an RMI?
remote
Method invocation.
Method invocation.
RPC, remote
Or
machine call.
Corba.
I did
IOP.
H2O. I'm handed a giant terabytes data set. And I'm handed a function, go evaluate it on all the data. Well, you have to hand the data out everywhere across the wire. So there's an RPC, right? And I implemented it. Ugh. Is there implementations in Java? Yes. Did it do what I wanted? No. So I implemented my own. Is it all written in Java? Yes. Is there any magic? No. but I implemented it. So that's what I'm hearing you get out of ecstasy, which is fine. It's finance. I was curious. Finance.
Yeah.
And in particular, in my case, if you handed a file object across the wire, I wouldn't know shit from Shinola, and the serializer would just put the bits down. The other guy would open the bits. When you did an open or whatever, the OS would say, "No, this is no file handle I've ever seen before." So,
Or if it is a file handle it's seen before, you're going to have some.
yeah,
very
you have
strange
other
behavior.
issues, right? I didn't put any security or thought into that. I said things in the design doc: can't pass locks, can't call system exit. Of course, you could call system exit. It would just shoot one node of the cluster down. It wouldn't actually, you could do your limits to what
So
you
out
could
of
do.
curiosity, is AA the language you wish you could have built H2O in?
Well, that's what was one of my goals. Yeah.
Cool.
I started
I love that
AA
answer. I love
because
that
I was
answer.
doing fintech machine learning on large data sets, and the data sets are too big for Python and R, and Java was annoying as hell to do interactive machine learning.
Yep.
So I was like, what the hell? Can't I do
No, I
something?
got accused of that early on. Someone looked at what we were designing and they're like, are you sure you're not just designing this because you wish you had this language to build coherence in? I was like, well, this is certainly the language I wish I would have had to build coherence in. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I had no qualms about doing H2O in Java. That worked out well as far as I'm concerned. There are a bunch of
Java's freaking incredible. I mean, it's as much as I beat up on it, it's got to be one of the greatest things ever built in the history of the world, let alone computer science.
Less well advertised than Spark, though.
I claim it. You said Java, you didn't say H2O.
I said
I
Java.
claim H2O is handily better than Spark in a lot of these domains. It's fine. It didn't win the war. I don't care. I'm off doing
Apache is just a plot that we've had for a long, long time to make sure that there's a huge opportunity for commercial software by making all the open source stuff suck really badly.
Yeah. And
there's some good open source out there, but yeah.
The
As long
main.
as you're not recording this clip, I'm good.
I do love the Rich Hickey talks where he's like, I was trying to implement closure in Java, and then I realized, go straight to the JVM. It is a lot of things that Java is not.
Yes, right, yes. Well, there were times when I went to the JVM and not through Java. Mostly Java, but they're definitely.
Back to the main thing, when you do things because you like it, because you're interested in, it's much better. It comes out much better things when you personally involved.
Yeah. These are all labors of love here.
You figure out, and when you figure out what is it, when you have structure, and then go to search for funding for businesses you can support. That's at least my opinion.
Yeah, well, I'm not looking.
Not the other way around.
So.
There is nothing wrong in trying to get funded, but it's wrong to build a product to get funded. If you're half of it there, then try to search for some partners to back you up, to support you, but not before you at least halfway there. At least my opinion is this.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. This is like, these projects all need a champion, and the project has to be well enough along with the champion in love with it still, and then there's room for more people to pile in. But you need a champion, you need a coherent vision.
Although the transition away from the benevolent dictator has proved risky for a lot of projects.
Yeah, I understand. But I think you have to start with the benevolent dictatorship, or you just get an ADA. You get a Department of Defense mandated 3-hump camel. It's just like, it's too ugly.
I believe there is nothing
at
wrong with. Go ahead.
When you look at founder-run companies, I was actually just reading something this week, so you may have seen the same link or something, because there's only so many things written in a week. But there's a dramatically higher percentage of innovation coming out of companies that are still founder-run than there are out of, the brand names that get bought and sold between private equity funds. I just saw Reebok just got transferred from one fund to another for $2.5 billion this week. Like, it used to be founder run, like for years and years. It was, what's his name?
Yeah, I get it. having been there, there's a drive and there's a vision. And then when you move away from that, there's a profit margin, and then there's, marketing, and then there's sales, and there's bottom line and whatever. And innovation goes out the window as a low risk to gain ratio. There's a small set of things you'll innovate on. And
There was a quote: the graduate, the deadlines corrupts the engineer vision of perfection, of perfectionism, something like that. The deadlines corrupt the perfectionism in an engineer because it have to deliver results.
No,
I would argue that's what I want. I want my startups that are taking lots of risks and may go out of business or maybe do something amazing.
Yeah.
And
right.
I want my Ford and GM to build a car that is going to consistently do well on every high-speed crash. As things get mature, great. Hand the mature things over to the adults who want to be very conservative, and then go do something crazy.
Yeah, that model has to be careful because Congress had to step in and say, quit killing people before they actually did well on high-speed crashes. And then they gradually applied engineering over a long period of time. And Intel, I'll claim, is at least got some portions of this right. They're not mandated by anybody market-wise. They have consistently, gradually improved and kept all backwards compatibility on x86. And I think that they would go faster if they could, but they hit hard laws of physics and enormous costs, which are entirely reasonable to say that they're making, limits on where they're going to go with buying new fabs at $1 billion a pop. So I think Intel is one of the few big American corps that are sort of doing that one right. Whereas,
yes, they hit a wall where they now have to convince all the developers to stop writing linear code.
Yeah, and this is my
actually
press for
Intel
AA
is
cost model.
Intel is having AMD build their chips now. I don't know if you knew that.
No.
So AMD spun out AMD Foundries as a separate company called Global Foundries, and that got bought by a big fund over in China or something. I can't remember the lineage of money, but now Intel is actually outsourcing some of their production because they can't get their whatever made up number nanometer to work. As you know, if you don't know, when someone says 7 nanometers, that means nothing to do with 7 or nanometers, right? So Samsung has 5 nanometer, which has nothing to do with either 5 or nanometer. And now TSMC has 4 in production and 3 in almost production for nanometers. Neither of those exist. There's nothing to do, when they say 4 nanometers, has nothing to do with 4 nanometers. It's, in fact, there's only 2 process nodes that are currently in leading edge production. One of them is what Intel calls 14 nanometer, and it's what TSMC calls, I think, 10 nanometer, and the other is what Intel calls 10 nanometer, which is what TSMC calls 7, 5, and 4 nanometer. So it's they're all just versions of the same, because there's only one company that makes the device that makes the chips. There's only one. It's 270 million per machine. It comes in on jetliners. It comes from Europe. What's the name of the company? ASML, right?
Yeah, okay.
And they only have 2 devices that they're selling, right? The equivalent of the 14 nanometer from Intel and the equivalent of the 10 nanometer from Intel. That's it. Everyone's using the same junk.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, but the same junk, but they have, their own recipes. But anyway, sorry for the.
And by junk, you mean things that can put down a feature on literally a nanometer scale.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's.
I would like you to put this on the silicon wafer, but you're only allowed to miss by 200 silicon atoms in either direction.
Yeah, and you put a billion of them down.
Now.
Yeah, put a billion down and be fairly reliable about putting a billion down.
But I wanted to say on Tidor's comment about the deadlines, there's a different way to look at it, which I have this old quote I used to.
The deadline, the quote was the deadline corrupts the engineer idealism. Yeah, and vote from.
So we had an engineering heavy startup, really good engineers, and Mark Falco, who sometimes joins us, he was one of my early engineers, one of my first hires. We had a saying, we'd say, there are no great tech companies. There are no great technology companies, period, right? There are great sales companies, And if you do a good job on sales, it gives you permission. It gives you runway, if you will, to do great technology, right? The only companies that survive are the companies that know how to sell,
Yeah.
right? If you can't find a customer who has a problem that they're willing to pay you to fix, or if you
Okay,
can't
how
find a
about
customer
you?
that you can take golfing so they sign a contract, whatever. Like
Yeah,
you
I
make
accept that.
up the story.
How about if you find a problem that needs to be solved, and there is a huge potential to when you solve that problem?
The gap between admitting or witnessing a problem and getting the money in and having the problem solved is huge. And that's why founders get paid. That's why CEOs get paid so much money. That gap is a giantly difficult bridge to cross.
Okay, I agree.
Minus
I
the
agree
bridge.
with it.
There's no bridge.
Yeah, okay,
Right.
fine. Yes.
You
It's
build,
easy
you
to
build
solve a real
your own
problem
version.
and not make any money. The guy who's maintaining NTP has vastly improved the progress of humanity. I
That's
would
a
argue
fail
that
in the
Richard
sales
Hitt making
department.
SQLite has vastly increased the progress of humanity. And they
Yeah,
like,
okay.
make their mortgage.
That's fine too. You can solve a problem and still don't make any money because that's a sales problem. It's not. Yeah. Okay, I agree with this too.
But like, yeah, NTP, that made the world a better place.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's no bridge. Yeah. That's correct. Been there, done that. It was a tough slog. Made some cool
Now
shit.
I'm curious
though.
if there's anyone new in the NTP project, or we're just hoping those guys never get old.
Never die of old age. Yeah, the Y2K and all the COBOL programmers were like, I'm 70 and retired. Leave me alone.
Can anyone give a short introduction how the whole process of funding works? You present your ideas, you go to a meeting, to a board, they listen your idea, and then
You talking about VC funding, venture capital? Been down that path a few
any
times.
kind of funding. I'm not really. I don't know how exactly all the way all the things work.
Has anyone on this call gotten DARPA funding?
Not me. I've gotten VC funding.
I guess we're doing VC then.
Twice, 1.5 times. I didn't count it once. Yeah, so VCs want to see a one or two, maybe three co-founders that are extremely tight because, as pointed out, co-founder-run companies do way the hell better. And if you break a co-found team up, that usually breaks the company indirectly because the remaining co-founder is like fucking the head. Okay. They look for a potential market that's ridiculous because they have a 90% fail rate. So they need a 10-to-1 uptick to break even on their investments. So they really want you to have the 100-to-1 opportunity, and they're hoping for the 1 in 100 that makes their, becomes the Google and the PayPal and the eBays of the world, right? So you have to have like sort of ludicrous uptick possibilities. They want to see that you have got something figured out about how you could do a technology. So there's a technology hurdle. There isn't a rush generally to produce the technology to the market, or it's a different conversation. If you're in a race with somebody, like everyone went from, they pivoted away from doing flying vehicles to self-driving cars, but for a while it was accepted that we were going to have bigger and bigger drones and they just carry people, and the race is on to make a human safe. Okay, so as soon as you have a race, then it's a different conversation because there's a race. But if I'm like looking at making medical device, it sits to my watch, and I'm Apple, I'm going to grab medical inputs from billions of people, and I'm going to run them all together and hand out healthcare advice from sampling. Okay, so I have some sort of market involved that's large and slow moving. There's no rush unless there's somebody else is pounding down that path. So that's not a problem. So you got to be a tight team. You got to have some interesting technology hurdle you're going to build that's going to be hard for somebody else to catch up to you. And then once you're ahead, you can stay ahead by throwing down patent thickets and shit like that. There's lawyer money can be used to slow down people, keep you ahead. You want to have a ginormous output market going. You want to have a technology that you can build that doesn't have a huge built-in cost to build it, and like building rockets to the moon. The problem with building a rocket is it's fucking expensive to build the rocket. Whereas if I'm building another version of Twitter, Me Too, MySpace, whatever, that's cheap to build and get going. Now, those spaces are already heavily dominated by big players, and they have the biggest guy wins theory running, where you're not the big guy, so you didn't win, so you're not going to go. But if you're not in that case, then you can now head down the path of we'll bother to talk to you. And then the style of things is you want to put together an investment deck, strategy,
A
conversation.
plan. They will require you from some kind of plan, how you
Yeah,
progress.
right. Well, the investment deck is your plan. So if you go to like Y Combinator and you take them up, if you're really curious about doing this seriously and you don't know very much about it, you go to Y Combinator is a good start. A startup incubator. So not just Y Combinator, there are others.
Yeah.
Okay, well, they'll take a big chunk of your product in exchange for teaching you what the hell goes on, and you'll get this in a lot more detail. Really, no, seriously what it is. They basically hand you a bad living wage for 6 months, during which you need to build out something that looks respectable enough that they can see there's an opportunity to keep going and that you have the right shit and you got your act together. And it's not that you're technically competent. Somebody on the team has to be technically competent. There has to be the sales CEO leader mindset person available as well. And they can be the same person or not. It's a little rare, but it's not unheard of. You need to arrange to have a story that's presentable to people who spend money in big money in risky ways, for which they have very well-tuned bullshit filters and well-tuned, this is how this market plays. And some of them are a little blind about things like, why does anyone need a left-handed electric fork? You know, they won't necessarily be on board with your vision.
Why are you disrupting the market? What
They
is
are looking for disruptors. That's okay.
They're
So the
looking for
classic,
believability. They're
yeah,
looking, they if you can't sell them,
yeah,
they know you're going to fail.
yeah,
So one of the things the VC is doing is giving you an opportunity to convince them, even if they don't care about what you're doing, they don't believe in what you're doing, they don't even understand what you're doing. If you can't sell them, you can't sell anyone.
yeah.
And they get sold.
I buy that. Yeah,
They get sold so much shit by so many people, often who are smarter than than most of us.
Smart people can be really dumb about markets, about what people want in life.
Okay,
You can
that
be
is a
really
venture
smart
capital.
about technology. You can be really smart about design and be just stupid as fuck about business. Like,
Here I am writing AA for free, right?
Yeah.
Is that a smart marketing decision? No. Who's going to pay for it? Never. Nobody. What the hell is the business logic here? None.
But the features of AA promising to the future will deliver some kind of value. You can extract, but you have to have the compiler first.
It's been well shown in the land of language design theory that there is no profit in being a language designer. There is a small market for tools vendors like IntelliJ, but it's a small market. No VC will ever invest.
I believe Scala got funded with VC funding.
Databricks got funded to feed data scientists. Nothing to do with Scala.
Okay. Yeah, fine.
The data scientists are people who take math to the real world. And there's places where math applied to the real world has big real world feedback. The insurance company's been doing it for years. Medical's been doing it for years. There are a couple other categories of people who've been doing this for years. You're trying to broaden the market for people who have smaller problems, but still math makes a win for everybody involved. That's Databricks' target, right?
Yeah.
And that's why they got funded. They did not get funded for Scala for shit.
Okay.
So by the way, going back, I mentioned that, first you got to be able to sell the VC. That's one of the things they're looking for.
Okay.
The other two things, if I can boil it down to two, which I shouldn't, but the other two things they're looking for, Cliff mentioned one, they're looking for a team that can work together. Like if you have a great idea and you can sell, but you don't have a team, you can work with VCs and they'll find a team for you.
Yeah.
In other words, they
If
may love your idea, they may believe in your idea, they may be sold on your idea, but you need to be part of a functioning, cohesive team. So that's why if you already have a team from a previous startup that did well, like you basically just write your own check, right? Like,
That's a single, yeah, that's a signal to indicate there is
because it's a
something here.
signal of exactly, because now it's not a sure bet, but it's a
Yeah.
foundationally good bet, right? So then the third
Yeah,
thing though that they look for is scalability.
Yeah.
In other words, if you solve this problem once, can you sell it 1 million times? Can you go from solving one customer's pain point that they're willing to pay for? Can you show me a way that you can turn that into doing it over and over and over again, scalable, where each additional customer has a higher margin of profitability attached to it?
Yeah.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. That's venture capital. The other ways, there's something called like seed funding, something. There are
Seed
government
funding is
programs
just-
too that have
seed-
interested. Okay.
Most of angel funding and seed funding is just VC without the paperwork, without as much paperwork.
VC minus
Mhm.
minus.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's less
Yeah.
money, and also they tend to be a little less sophisticated, and they tend to be a little more invasive because it's a higher percentage of their net worth that's at risk, so they're paying closer attention. So you get a lot more hassle as the recipient of that kind of money. You get a lot more hassle from the investor, and you don't get any sort of you don't get as much high scale advice. Like they don't have the right kind of connections. They don't necessarily have, how do you bring this company, what are the right moves to make at small scale such that you can bring it up to a larger scale?
No.
You know,
It's-
like
It's a
you-
lower bar to enter, but higher risk for them.
Yes.
They tend to be good if you need someone to pay for the ramen to keep you alive during the first 2 years.
Right.
But if you can
Mhm.
self-fund, you can probably skip it.
No.
If you can,
Okay.
yeah, if you can, sometimes it's helpful. And I've definitely done a starting seed round that took us from 2 people to like 3.5 or 4, and gave us 6 months. And we had a lot of money left in the bank when we went around for round A. But by that time, we had already figured out to pivot to machine learning. And we had, you know, the first cuts of an ML algorithm, and the market was starting to explode. So it was a critical 6 months for that seed money, and it did the right thing.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it
Cool.
can be useful.
Cool.
Seems
It
like a
is-
good
it is
pivot.
little
It's hard
more-
to sell a key value store.
Yeah, it is now. Well, it was back then. I mean, yeah. The market was already saturated and we were done.
We did.
Okay,
we
so
did well.
So basically, these are 2 options. How about government-funded programs that are interested in something like that?
Right.
That would
So the kind of the story there is, it's government money. There's a specialty breed of people who get government money who specialize in filling out the grant work and aligning things to the right government agencies and filling and doing the time stamp, whatever. And there's a lot of due diligence on the government side that's sort of less makes sense from maybe your point of view and has very specific jargon. So if you're an academic in a university, maybe you're getting it on a regular basis, but you have an entire university around you that helps you write and fill out these grants and has the money flowing at a regular basis
Yeah.
to make a living out of it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Also, you pitch it slightly differently. The
Yeah, you
VCs
definitely
tend to
pitch
want
it-
to know you can take a lot of money. The government grants tend to say, okay, is this something that is going to save a large number of lives, or is this something that can kill a large number of people?
Yeah.
Those are the 2
Yeah.
things they're most interested
Okay.
in funding.
Yeah, that's fair. They're interested in different kinds of
They're
things.
interested in different things, but they also hand you different levels of money and have different
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
expectations. Right, the
Mhm,
government guy wants to
Okay.
see a problem solved that doesn't necessarily turn into $1 billion, but maybe it keeps a bridge from falling down. Right?
Yeah.
We're discovering that if we salt our roads in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the salt
Yeah.
rushes down through the drain vents
Yeah,
on the bridge, the rebar
they're in-
roads and blah, blah,
They're
blah.
too into the game that they fund little projects that they accumulate a larger intellectual
Yes.
mass, if you will.
Very few giant government projects get funded, but then you hear about them, you
Mhm.
know, super collider this or
Yeah.
CERN that, or whatever.
Yeah.
NASA gets Hubble and stuff like that, but these are
Cool.
few
Yeah.
and far between.
Yeah.
Two things I'd add. First of all, only solve one problem.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to solve 2 things, like for example, building a language so you can build a platform, no VC would be willing to talk to you because it's
Yeah.
just idiotic, like what I'm doing.
Focus.
Like, no I won't even talk to VCs about what we're doing because it's just
Yeah.
stupid.
Right. Yeah.
So
Okay,
so only
how can you
focus on
approach
one
it?
thing. So that's the first. So make sure it's just one problem you're solving. Doesn't matter how small, how big, it's one problem. If you can't describe it as one problem, you're doing the wrong thing if you're looking for investment. The other thing is always prefer a customer to a VC. If you can get your investment from a customer,
Yeah.
I don't care if it costs you an arm and a leg and 2 of your ears, you know, like you do whatever, like if you get customers, VCs will fucking knock your door every day. They'll be bursting down your door. If you can't get customers, you're screwed. So anytime you have a choice between wasting time on a VC, and I guarantee you 99% of your time with a VC is a fucking waste of time. They will run you in circles. So VCs are like an airport where no one ever lands, right?
Yeah.
Planes circling overhead all the time, but they never want anyone to land, right? So VC will be like, I really like your deck. I think you got something there. I want you to just do the following 5 things for me and get back to me next week. And they will do that for the rest of your life. They will have you circling overhead forever, right?
Yeah.
So like, you know, the fish and cut bait thing, you know, fish or cut bait, man, they fish, they never cut bait.
It's a huge predictor of larger success if you already have customers and try to get funded.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, the point is, $1 from a customer is worth $100 from a VC. $1 from a customer is worth $100 from a VC.
Well, the way a way to think about it is that every time you add a customer or you look at the value you get out of the customer, that's worth sort of 10x what you're going to get as a valuation when you go to a VC to say,
that's right.
How much money for how much, what percentage of my company? I'm going to get 10 times more money if I have $100 from a customer, $1,000, $1 million from a customer.
Exactly.
Once you get a certain level of customer, you don't need the VC anymore anyhow. And you
one more thing, by the way, that a customer
is an asset. VC is a liability.
Yeah.
So a VC will tell you all sorts of advice, but keep in mind, if you're the one building the startup, you know more about what you're doing than any VC or all of them put together. Okay, so keep that in mind. But they will, if they're worried about you, they'll be like, you should do this, you should do that. And because you got your money there, you're going to chase their bullshit ideas until you're dead, right? You'll destroy your company by, but if you get a customer will say, hey, I like this. I'll give you more money if you do that.
This will help to streamline your business, your process.
Or potential customers, and you're talking to them, and then you float one of those ideas and they say, oh, I like that. So now you have two points of reference that they're like, we're willing to pay to have.
Okay, so
as soon as you have 3,
I went down this path a couple times, and I have some clear sort of advice here. The first is that the VCs will typically, the ones I dealt with would typically tell me that do this, but also you're the guy in charge, which is how they acknowledge that they weren't sitting in the hot seat. The other piece that I heard Cameron go down is if a client says X, you still have to keep in your head your vision and your market. And if you get that client landed, that's a data point that says you're in the right direction. I didn't change product market fit things until I had 3 clients that were saying, hey, once I hit 3, I said, okay, there's probably something going on here and we need to pivot the product vision a little bit. And that happened a couple times. So the big one was obviously key value storage and machine learning, but there were a bunch of little ones inside of that happened as well. But one guy says something, you want his money, but don't shoot yourself in the foot by pivoting to too specific.
True. A VC side, your customers invent your market. Whatever you think you're doing, when the customer comes with his money and said, "Why I want this," this becomes your market.
One guy is not a market unless he's really big, but then you're in a different ball game. You're a consultant to the one dude, right? 3 unrelated guys. Now you got a market.
Yeah. Correct. Okay, that's cool. Thank you for all the advice.
I gotta run. This has been fun.
I got the question about the technical hurt. And so are those VC guys like savvy in technology, or you have to explain those like technical hurt to them, try to simplify that? So for example, I see that you are writing like a programming language. And I think that it's very challenging to design a programming language, but how can you sell them as like technical hurt to those like investors?
So the VCs that I've talked to are of the level of a well-educated layman in a broad selection of things. They will not be language experts. They will not be aeronautics experts. They will not be rocket experts. They will not be biological medicine experts, but they will be well-educated. And it's their incentive to have more expert opinion. So they'll typically have access to experts in whatever domain you're trying to sell yourself in. So you might not be able to sell the VC on why AA is a better language and everyone will pay for it. But some expert will come along and say, AA has got something going for it or not, and who will be somewhat of an expert in the language field somewhere. The VCs will also have an expertise on like what's sellable. So a language is known to not be sellable, so that won't fly anyhow. But if you were building a better car, better airplane, better rocket, whatever, there's something to be sold for faster people move, cheaper time to market, less expensive ships crossing the ocean, whatever your thing is. They'll have enough knowledge to realize it's not just straight up bullshit, and enough knowledge of markets to say there is a chance there's a market here, and then they'll bring in an expert.
This is the main drive for us. Will we be able to sell things? Will you be able to make a product to sell to somebody else? Generally, I have the impression that VCs don't generally care about the technology a lot, like an engineering person.
Right.
As long as you have a product and you think you have a market and you think you have a problem and you think you can build a solution to that problem, the game is on.
Yeah, that's the difference. They're not excited about the technology. They're excited about a technology market fit and the money that can be pulled out because of that.
Don't talk to them about whether VHS is better than Betamax. Talk to them about the fact people want to watch movies at home.
Yeah, right. And you're going to sell a shit ton of VCRs. Yes.
The jargon is different. Yeah. Okay. Correct.
And then Netflix came along and the internet got fast and suddenly Blockbuster died.
Yeah.
But also keep in mind that there's the 80-20 rule with VCs as well. 80% of them are just imitating the rest.
There's some amount of that, yeah.
There are a lot of crap VCs out there. They're only VCs because daddy put 10 million into the fund and got them a job fresh out of college because they couldn't do anything else for a living. So there are a lot of stupid time wasters in the VC industry. So, but there are also some freaking brilliant people in the VC industry. So like you can waste a lot of time talking to the wrong ones. I'll put it that way from experience.
Okay.
So if you're really interested in playing the game, I encourage you to play the game because it'll be a learning experience. Like that first rebound girl after your big divorce from being a corporate slave, you're going to make mistakes, but you have to give it a good try or you won't make enough mistakes to learn anything. Something real, try hard, go build it, go sell it to VCs, and you'll learn way more than 15 minutes on listening to Cliff rant.
I believe that all of the advices was a good ones because they mainly come from experience and not from experience from engineering point of view about the venture capital. That's a valuable.
People pay a lot of money for stupid shit that you'll never hear me talk about, but they'll pay a lot of money for it. And so don't necessarily want it from an engineering point of view. You get a little stupid phone app that does something cool and tricky, Angry Birds or whatever. Fuck, there's tons of money in Angry Birds.
I understand the viewpoint.
I would never have said Angry Birds.
I'm aware of this. That the engineer's point of view is not exactly the mentality of a salesperson.
It's not the mentality of people who pay money.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. Don't. If you box yourself into something that's cool and fun to build, you are likely to not build something that's going to get paid for. It can happen, but there are a whole lot of people who pay money for Angry Birds. And it's not necessarily making more or less money than the entire Java VM.
And certainly a language designer or a compiler for any language certainly doesn't have a huge market. It's a niche market.
Look at the entire amount of profit that Databricks has ever pulled in and compare it to Angry Birds. There's your homework for the week. I have no
Yeah.
clue. I really don't.
I will do it. I will do it. Okay.
But I'm curious. Yeah, I'm really curious as the number. I wouldn't be surprised if those two are in the the wrong order.
Yeah. Okay. You mean the capitalization, but
Yeah. Capitalization is a good proxy. Good proxy.
Okay.
Databricks gets a higher free capitalization because of expectation in the future than Angry Birds will, right? And Angry Birds will be folded into PopCap or whoever actually runs the company. What's the percentage of PopCap that comes from Angry Birds?
I do remember that they have to sell courses on Coursera online. That's a main strategy of
See, if you're
return of
selling a
investment.
course for your product and that's your main source of income, your product sucks. Because you rely on people not being able to use your product to make money.
Yeah, I've heard that story a few times of we were all making our living selling support for the product, and then we ironed out a lot of the bugs, and then all the money dried up because
The support goes away. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, so you got a market, you just got a wrong product market fit. You need to either only be selling support in terms of you suck product, or you need to charge more for the product. But people are finding it useful, so why aren't they paying you more? And now that's a business decision on how you structure your product strategy, right?
So, Tidor, here's some free advice. Engineers do not have budgets. Never, ever, 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 ever waste any time building something to sell to an engineer.
They have no money.
Because even if you build something valuable, first of all, they don't have budgets. Second of all, they don't have budgets. And third of all, they'll look at it and say, I could have built this myself. Why would I pay for it?
Yeah.
So never, ever, ever,
I
ever build
can do it in
something
a
for
weekend.
engineers.
I can build your compiler in a weekend. I can
There you
build a
go.
part on
Absolutely.
See,
Elixir.
you say that, but
No problem.
Selling H2O, we exactly hit that. Oh, I know what you're doing. I get it. I can do that. We'd have to come back in 6 months after the engineer said, well, I never got around. I couldn't quite get to go. And you had to get the sales guy to hear between the lines of actually, yeah, this is really hard to build. Maybe we should pay for it.
So what was that, Aaron?
see, you say that the developers don't have any budgets, but Splunk has become a huge company off of we're going to do log aggregation and copy your logs from the server where your program's running to.
Splunk does not sell to engineers.
Yeah, right.
Splunk does not sell to engineers.
Right.
Splunk does not sell to engineers. The way to get money from engineers is you give them things for free that they can use that then sucker their company into having to pay for it.
Right.
And Splunk did it beautifully.
Yes. Yes. This is
So that's why, even though we had a commercial product at Tangasol, no developer ever bought it. It was free for development until you put it into production. So we'd support you, free support, free code, free blah, 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 all the way up to production. And then they'd want to go into production. And by then the company's already sold on it, right? They're like, it's ready to go. And then they'd pay for it.
Yep.
And they'd pay big.
The IT department looks at the processes they're running, and they are part and parcel of the bottom line income that's coming in, and that they report to the CEO as here's how we have our cost of goods and how the business works. We need an X amount of budget to flow money through the system and bring it into the company as a whole. That's our operating budget. We need this to operate. They have a budget. They make money. They're part of the cost of goods of the company. The IT department pays for Splunk or Tangasol, Coherence, or whatever, not any engineer. The engineers were using it. They were playing with it. They loved it. It was great. It helped them do their jobs. They got no money.
So the engineer's idea is mainly the quality thing, but the venture capital are interested in quantity. So that's there is a
VCs, no, they're interested in a market. Market can be specified as $1 billion company or $1,000 million companies. It's better to have $1,000 million companies,
but you as engineer are pretty much care about the quality of thing you build. You build it because you like it, because you envision something.
Do I like my job?
No. You like to work on your compiler. You worked for 2 years.
But I took plenty of jobs in the day that paid money, and I just didn't like it because they paid money.
Yeah. And if you go to a VC, they won't interested in the quality. They would interested in the quantity.
Right. Well, if I'm going to the VC for money, they're interested in my passion. One of their red flag marks. I have to be excited about what I'm doing.
Of course, but how do you capitalize that? How they mentally capitalize your passion about the
How they
success of the
recognize it,
project?
or they capitalize is they say he's got passion, he's got a market found, he's got a product that looks like it fits the market. Then we're going to start heading down the further inspection, see if we want to put money in here. But I need to have a passionate person who's the leader. I need to have a market, right? I some customers, and I need to have a product that's, technically challenging to build, so that it can't be just knocked off. Like Angry Birds is itself not technically challenging, and so a bazillion Flash games have come before and after, and they're kind of a hit or miss, right?
You have to have some technical advantage, or it's not so easy to build it.
Yes. So PopCap or whoever these, Flash game manufacturers, they churn out the games. Every now and then they get a hit, but that's not a VC. They're not taking VC money right now. That's their business model. One game in 100 wins.
Yeah.
So
in the end, is it worth the hustle? Is it worth the hustle of the VC money, or you try to locally build your local businesses, use your product to try to grow locally beforehand?
I'm building. I built a machine learning platform, which I needed a market, which was every larger company, mid to large size company around the world, but because it's more difficult to do business elsewhere, starting in the United States. So my market first cut was United States doing machine learning. Okay, that's not very local. That required people to fly. That required people to go around and do things. You wanted a local sales guy and stuff like that. If my customer is Angry Birds, then I'm going to put it up on Google Play. Right, and I'm going to do indie games, and I'm looking at how do I market and sell indie games. I could put it up on Steam. I could put it up on whatever. There's indie game platforms. So what's your product? What's your market? Then that dictates where you're going to go with your plan. If you're selling language translation, automated language translation tools, I got a Google phone device that will take a live optic picture in a foreign language and translate it to English in the same font and the same sign. It's kind of cool. I can pull up to a written French, menu board in chalk and read it. Okay, cool. Who's my market? Well, it's all over the world, but it's actually on the phone app. So it's a phone app market, but I need to have blah, 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 whatever.
Okay, that's exclusive for software development. For a software product, it doesn't need to be local.
Yeah, if I'm making cheesecakes to sell, boy, it's my local market down the street.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know.
Correct. Cool.
I think you underestimate the impressiveness of Cheesecake Factory's logistics chain.
No, Cheesecake Factory is a different story altogether. That's a cut and dried, clone-ish, kind of obnoxious, large chain. And if your goal is to build a large chain, you start small, you get 2 or 3 restaurants going and they're working well. Then you start looking at models where I can bring another restaurant online where I don't have to be responsible for these restaurants on a daily basis. Right? I'm not visiting them and making this. Like I run one restaurant and I've hired cooks and I've hired wait staff and I've hired people to clean up and maintenance and whatever. And I'm paying the bills and I'm buying the food and the clients are coming in, the customers are making money. I'm doing good. So it's doing really well. I want to go start a new one up. Well, I can't be at both places. So, but this time I've hired a management in the one. So now I have a manager, I have to have a chain of managers, I have to roll over in managers. That's all going well. I got my second one. I have the managers bouncing back and forth. I've got 4 or 5 managers running 2 different restaurants and they're bouncing back and it's working well. I get a third one going. I need more managers. And now my job went from I'm running a restaurant, I'm running a set of restaurants with a management team that's running those restaurants that internally can hire and fire cooks and chefs. I never see the damn cooks and the wait staff anymore. The step up from there is another big jump where I want to spin up a new restaurant where my touch on the new restaurant is very low. It has to be a good location. I have to do some research and workouts. I have to hire a complete set of staff and management that goes in there. And I'm doing all these things, getting number 4 on, but I can't keep doing that, or that's the limit of how fast I can expand. To go faster, I have to up-level my skill set, push down the hiring of a new restaurant and all staff. So McDonald's is in that zone.
Yeah, there is a huge difference between building one thing and building.
It's all the difference between building it once and building a process that builds them indefinitely. Yes.
Cool. Super.
I did machine learning for H2O. I built a model that detected fraud. Well, I got new cases of fraud. I got new data sets to test on. I got new ideas for this. I didn't need a model for detecting fraud. I needed a process to build a model for detecting fraud. Building the process was a big pile of work. but it let me churn out a new model on a daily basis and
Yeah.
inject it to the clients to discover new cases of fraud and clean
Yeah.
up the
You-
false
You
positives.
go specific and then you generalize and then you expand.
And you have to keep your vision on the market as you go. Yes, but you build
Yeah.
something, get it
And
going.
that's what people say about Google. Google is not a company that builds a search engine. They're a company that builds a process that spits out a new search engine every 4 hours.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And they pivoted, they built a search engine and they built a better one, and then they continuously evolved it, and then they built a process to continuously evolve search engines. Yes.
You
Yep.
guys need to look at Matt's tweet.
All right, and then I gotta go. We're like way on here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And let's
Oh,
see,
wait.
Uber tweet here.
Yeah. Cool. Okay.
I mean, it's kind of true though. Like I spend a lot of time in a code editor, and I've spent less than $1,000 on code editors in my life.
Yes, yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
I get the
That's
ads for Ultimate Edition, IntelliJ every time, but you know, I'm still in Community Edition. It works for me.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Cool, guys.
Done.
Cool.
Good.
Yeah.
Good talking to
Thanks.
everybody. Till next week.
Bye.
Yeah. Cool. Bye.